Suddenly, Hydroshock re-emerged with a single wave of his hand, one of those torrents of water arcing in front of him, forming sort of a half-circle torrent of water, a massive one. As he propelled his hand forward, suddenly the spinning and rushing of the water stopped, as the entire thing froze solid and shattered instantly, the pieces flying at me, machine gun fire of ice crystals. As I raised a shield to defend myself, I could still feel the vibrations as they smashed into the barrier. Now's my chance, I thought. How about a new one? I said as I whipped my hand back, spinning around in a circle as I gathered all of the liquid steel at my disposal into a single object. Heavy metal! Run! I exclaimed as the liquid steel began to gather and extend, using both my telekinetic force and my physical strength together, whipping around with a steel rod that extended out farther and farther, smashing through torrents of water rapidly as it rushed in Hydroshock's direction. He quickly began to try to move, simultaneously forming another of those barriers of ice. He was fast, but not fast enough this time. The barrier wasn't thick enough, and I managed to smash my way through it, slamming into him just as the water was about to try to carry him away again. At the end of a rod, probably more than 70 foot long, I grabbed hold and swung with everything that I was worth, swinging him around in a circle. "This is it!" I shouted as I finally ceased the swing, sending him hurtling across the field of combat to the other end of the canal, smashing into the wall, a resounding crushing sound as he impacted, and stones flew out from around him. In the moment, the water that filled the surrounding area, running across the ground, covering the sky, and swirling in all of those torrents, seemed to shake and shudder. The water held in the sky beginning to start to collapse, to fall down, but only for a moment as it began to re-establish itself. "Not enough!" I exclaimed as I beat my wings, rushing in that direction like a bullet, unextending the long rod most of the way, all the remaining steel going into a large cannonball-like hammer at the end of the rod. As I approached, going into a rapid spin, using both my physical strength and my telekinetic force, I smashed into the wall of the canal as the surrounding stone shattered and crumbled, the cracks spreading out further as dust shot out of them, and massive fragments of the wall began to unheave themselves, and out of the mix, Hydroshock, just managing to slip past the blow, as more torrents of water began to head in his direction rapidly, one of them arcing out in my direction, heading dead for me. I sent the rod in my hands into a rapid spin, as the massive steel ball on the end of it spread out into an umbrella-like shape, with sort of a drill-type spiral to it, spinning as the water impacted, sending it flying off in all other directions, and not hitting me, as Hydroshock began to disappear into the water again. "Damn it! No, not this time," I said as once again the steel ball reformed itself on the end of the rod as it extended itself out. "Heavy metal! Doom whip!" I exclaimed as I changed the rod extending from the sphere into its gel substance, flexible, malleable. I began to whip it around, using both my telekinetic force and my physical strength once again, mixing the two in order to create a wobbling effect. As I whipped the bungee attached to the steel ball itself went mad, lashing out in all directions, smashing into the ground, the torrents of water surrounding it, the watery ceiling overhead, rapidly bouncing from one to the next as I whipped the cord wildly, finally giving a solid pull, drawing the steel ball back as I used my telekinetic wavelength to catch it in air, looking out at the explosions of water and stone, trying to see if I had made impact with anything. At just that instant, water shot up simultaneously from above and below me, the torrents freezing into shards of ice as I just barely managed to evade, beating my wings and flapping out of the path of the oncoming shards as they shattered into one another. And once again, the fight was on. Back to another game of hide and seek. But I did notice a change as I looked about, flying from place to place, trying to stay razor sharp, make sure that he couldn't land any sneak attacks. I began to notice that the number of funnels of water extending from the floor to the ceiling was decreasing. There weren't as many as there were before. As that caught my attention, I also began to notice that the area in which all of this was taking place had actually retracted in. It had gotten smaller, more confined. Was he getting weaker? Could he no longer maintain a larger radius? Or was he just building up for another attack? Something bigger? To be honest, I couldn't tell. Before, as my eyes were watching the edge, it retracted again, pulling in closer as the number of swirling typhoons decreased, falling away even more, as suddenly Hydroshock emerged from the water ceiling overhead. Well, Heavy Metal, this has been a good fight. You're a worthy challenge. I have to say I've enjoyed myself. But everything good has to come to an end eventually. I can't afford to keep fighting you like this. I may have a great amount of power and an ample supply of water, but I don't think I've ever used this much telekinetic energy before. It's exhausting. To be honest, I'm having a hard time keeping up with it, which has never really happened to me before. It only goes to show you what happens when you have a real challenge. It pushes your limits, lets you know where they are, what you can do, and what you can't. You learn and you grow stronger. That's the purpose of a challenge. But I can tell that I'm not going to be able to beat you like this. These tactics have worked for me before, but you're just too strong for them. That armor and that metal of yours gives you too powerful a defense. Even if I do land hits on you, that metal protecting you seems to take most of the impact out of it, he exclaimed, as I looked closely at him to see that he was holding one of his arms to the side. It didn't look like he could move it. That was probably my hit. He doesn't have armor like me, so the hits that actually do land swing home. It did have an effect. So, in order to beat you, I need to cut through that armor. It's the only way, and my current levels of attack aren't going to do it. In order to beat you, I'm gonna have to push it further than I've ever pushed it before. To be honest, I've been wanting to try this, but I haven't really had any call to use it. It's just too much of an overload, too stressful, and there's no one really strong enough to require it. Except you. I really don't know if you're going to be able to survive this, but as I said, even though I hope to beat you, somewhere deep down, I also hope that you live. But with the power of this attack, I can't guarantee it. If I were you, I'd brace yourself, he said as he removed his arm from gripping his other one, extending his arm and hand out to the side of him as the water surrounding his feet, holding him in place, turned to ice. And suddenly, all of the water in the surrounding areas began to spiral in. Every drop of it seemed to swirl in a never-ending mad rush of torrents, all bound for a single direction, a single point far to the side of Hydroshock, as it all gathered into an absolutely enormous sphere of water. This thing was gigantic. Suddenly, the watery ceiling overhead and the endless torrents were gone. It was simply Hydroshock floating there on a sheet of ice, with that massive sphere beside him, as he began to grit his teeth, his eyes beginning to glow a powerful blue as the massive sphere of water, probably 100 or so foot across, in all directions, began to shudder, and suddenly it shrunk down by a few feet, and then a few more, each coming in bursts, rapidly shrinking, before shivering for a short time, and then shrinking again. Bursts of air flowed out from the direction of the sphere as it shrunk down, sending shock waves into the air, as I could see Hydroshock gritting his teeth so hard that it looked like he might break them, as a stream of blood began to run from his nose, and he began to shout out violently. I remember, I thought to myself, that was how I felt the first time that I summoned Spirit, the process that I went through to create him, the amount of telekinetic energy that I forced into that steel sphere. He's doing something like that right now, using that much force. Again and again I watched the sphere shrink, one level after another, the shock waves that erupted from it getting bigger each time he shrunk it down, until that massive sphere, more than 100 foot across in every direction, was no bigger than a beach ball, vibrating violently as if all of that water was fighting to escape, so highly pressurized that it was ridiculous. Whatever he was about to do, it was gonna be big.